The first rays of dawn filtered through Emma's bedroom curtains, painting soft golden streaks across her peaceful face. At 23, she had always been a light sleeper, a trait that served her well in her job as a veterinary assistant at the local wildlife clinic just outside Narok. Her cottage, inherited from her grandmother, sat on 5 acres of scrubland dotted with fever trees and whistling thorns, a perfect sanctuary for someone who preferred the company of animals to the bustling social life her university friends had embraced in Nairobi. But this morning, something different stirred her from sleep, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards of her small cottage. The sound was unlike anything she had heard before, deeper than a cow's lowing, more resonant than the hippos that occasionally wandered up from the seasonal river that marked her property's eastern boundary. Emma's trained ear, accustomed to identifying animal distress calls, immediately recognized something urgent in that sound. Emma sat up in bed, her blonde hair tousled, listening intently. The sound came again, deeper this time, accompanied by what sounded like splashing water. Her heart quickened as she slipped out of bed and padded barefoot across the worn wooden floors her grandmother had polished by hand for 60 years. The morning chill raised goosebumps on her arms as she moved to the window overlooking her backyard, a sprawling area she had gradually transformed into a semi-wild garden where native plants attracted butterflies and small birds. What she saw made her gasp and nearly stumble backward. There, beside her small swimming pool, a luxury she had installed the previous year with her first substantial paycheck, was a baby elephant. The creature was no bigger than a Great Dane, its wrinkled gray skin hanging loose over what should have been a plump, healthy frame. The calf was desperately trying to drink from the chlorinated water, its tiny trunk dipping repeatedly into the blue-tinted pool while its legs shook with the effort of remaining upright. Emma's mind raced as she tried to process what she was seeing. Her cottage sat on the edge of the greater Masai Mara ecosystem, where human settlements gradually gave way to protected wildlife corridors that stretched toward the famous reserve. It wasn't uncommon to see zebras grazing in her front yard, or to find giraffe tracks around her vegetable garden after a night raid. The elephants occasionally wandered through the area during their seasonal migrations, following ancient paths that predated any human settlement. But never alone, and certainly never babies. The sight of this lone calf triggered every alarm bell in Emma's veterinary training. Elephant mothers were famously protective of their young, rarely allowing calves to stray more than a few yards from their side. For a baby, this young to be alone meant only one thing. Its mother was dead, and the calf had been wandering alone for days, possibly weeks. Without hesitation, she threw on the heavy cotton robe that hung behind her bedroom door and rushed outside. The morning air carried the scent of approaching rain and blooming acacia, but underneath those familiar smells was something else, the musky, earthy scent of elephant, untinged with the sour smell of an animal in distress. As she approached, Emma could see the full extent of the calf's condition. Its eyes were sunken with dehydration, its skin was caked with mud and dried blood from thorn scratches, and every rib was clearly visible beneath its hide. The calf made no attempt to flee as Emma knelt nearby. Instead, it extended its tiny trunk toward her, sniffing curiously. Emma's heart melted at the gesture. This baby was seeking comfort, not afraid of humans. That could only mean one thing. It had been separated from its herd for some time and was desperate for any form of care. Emma rushed back inside and grabbed her phone, dialing the Kenya Wildlife Service emergency line. After several transfers and a frustrating conversation with a tired-sounding official, she'd learned what she had feared. It was Saturday morning, and the nearest rescue team wouldn't be available until Monday. The baby elephant had perhaps hours, not days, before dehydration claimed its life. Standing in her kitchen, still in her robe, Emma made a decision that would change everything. She had worked with orphaned animals before, knew the basics of emergency care. If this little one was going to survive the weekend, it would be up to her. Her first priority was hydration. Emma mixed a careful solution of electrolytes and coconut water, the closest substitute to elephant milk she could manage on short notice. She filled a large water bottle and attached a makeshift nipple, then returned to her backyard where the calf still waited by the pool. The first feeding was tentative. Shiv, the elephant calf, sniffed the bottle suspiciously before its instincts took over. It began to suck eagerly, its tiny trunk wrapping around Emma's wrist for comfort. The sight brought tears to her eyes. This beautiful creature was fighting so hard to live. As the day progressed, Emma found herself falling into a routine she never could have imagined. Every 2 hours, she prepared another bottle. She researched elephant care frantically on her laptop, learning about their dietary needs, social behaviors, and medical requirements. The calf, which she had begun thinking of as Hope, seemed to grow stronger with each feeding. By afternoon, Hope was attempting to stand for longer periods. Emma had spread old blankets under the shade of her largest tree, creating a makeshift nursery. She watched in wonder as Hope explored this small sanctuary, using its trunk to investigate every leaf, stone, and flower within reach. The sun was setting when Emma realized the profound responsibility she had taken on. Hope had curled up on the blankets, its trunk resting across Emma's lap as she sat beside it. The trust implicit in that gesture was overwhelming. This wild animal, which should have been with its mother in the vast African bush, had instead chosen to find comfort with a young woman who was making things up as she went along. Emma stroked Hope's rough skin gently, feeling the slow, steady rhythm of the calf's breathing. The first day had been about survival, getting food and water into Hope's system, providing basic comfort and safety. But looking at the peaceful expression on the elephant's face, our Emma realized this was just the beginning. She had thought it would be 1 night, maybe 2 at most, just until the authorities could take over. But as Hope shifted in sleep, making soft, rumbling sounds of contentment, Emma understood she had been naive. This orphaned elephant had chosen her, and somehow she had chosen Hope in return. The bond forming between them was already stronger than logic, deeper than the practical concerns that would soon arise. The first stars appeared overhead as Emma finally allowed herself to truly absorb what had happened. That morning, she had been a single young woman living quietly on the edge of nowhere. Now, she was the surrogate mother to one of Africa's most magnificent creatures. The challenges ahead would be enormous: legal, financial, emotional. But looking down at Hope's sleeping form, Emma felt a sense of purpose she had never experienced before. Tomorrow would bring new complications, new decisions, new fears. But tonight, in the soft darkness of her backyard, there was only a young woman and a baby elephant, both of them discovering that love could emerge in the most unexpected circumstances. Dr. Patel arrived just after sunset with a portable veterinary kit and a serious expression that softened considerably when he saw Hope. The calf had consumed 3 more bottles throughout the day and was showing remarkable improvement. Her eyes were brighter, her movement stronger, and she was vocalizing regularly, healthy signs for an elephant calf. The examination took over an hour. Dr. Patel was thorough, checking Hope's vitals, examining her skin for injuries, listening to her heart and lungs, and reviewing the feeding schedule Emma had improvised. When he finished, he sat back on the grass with a heavy sigh. The news was complicated. Hope was approximately 3 weeks old, severely underweight, and had likely been separated from her mother for at least 24 hours before reaching Emma's property. And the next 48 hours would be critical. The Conservancy's nursery facility was currently at capacity with 3 other orphaned calves recovering from the storm damage, and their specialized equipment had been compromised by power outages. Dr. Patel looked at Emma with an expression that was part professional assessment, part desperate hope. The Conservancy could take Hope back immediately, but their resources were stretched dangerously thin. Or Emma could continue the emergency fostering for a few more days, maybe a week, under Dr. Patel's direct supervision, until space and resources became available. Emma didn't hesitate. She would continue caring for Hope. Over the next 72 hours, Emma transformed her backyard into an elephant nursery. She purchased a child's wading pool for Hope to splash in. He ordered specialized milk replacement formula overnight from a sanctuary supply company, and converted her garden shed into a shelter with heat lamps for nighttime. Dr. Patel visited twice daily, monitoring Hope's progress and teaching Emma the intricacies of elephant care. But something unexpected was happening, something that went beyond emergency animal rescue. Hope was bonding with Emma in ways that surprised even Dr. Patel. Elephant calves in the wild stay close to their mothers constantly, learning everything from eating habits to social behaviors through observation and physical contact. Orphaned calves often struggle to bond with human caregivers, remaining skittish and stressed. But Hope seemed to recognize Emma as her mother figure immediately. She followed Emma everywhere, her trunk reaching out to touch Emma's legs, her soft calls becoming more frequent and varied. When Emma sat down, Hope would press against her side. When Emma worked in the yard, Hope would shadow her movements, trying to imitate whatever Emma was doing with clumsy trunk movements. The nights were the most revealing. Emma initially tried to sleep in her own bed, monitoring Hope through a baby monitor positioned in the yard. But Hope's distressed calls would wake Emma every hour, and she'd find the calf standing at her back door, trumpeting her loneliness. By the third night, Emma gave up and made a bed on her covered porch, close enough that Hope could see and smell her. The calf settled immediately, sleeping peacefully through the night with Emma nearby. Emma's social media posts about Hope's recovery went viral. News outlets picked up the story. By day 5, Emma's quiet street was lined with reporters and well-wishers hoping for a glimpse of the backyard elephant. Emma handled the attention awkwardly at first, uncomfortable with the spotlight, but she quickly realized the public interest could be valuable. It put pressure on authorities and organizations to provide resources and support. But not everyone was supportive. On day 7, Emma received a visit from Eleanor Pritchard, the head of Millbrook's Homeowners Association, accompanied by 2 town council members. They stood on Emma's front porch with clipboards and concerned expressions, citing ordinances about livestock, property use restrictions, and safety concerns. Several neighbors had complained about the noise, the smell, and the disruption to their quiet suburban neighborhood. Emma listened politely, her jaw tightening with each objection. When they finished, she invited them to meet Hope. The council members exchanged uncertain glances, but followed Emma to the backyard. Hope was splashing in her pool, spraying water with her trunk, and making joyful rumbling sounds. When she saw Emma, she immediately abandoned her play and rushed over, wrapping her trunk around Emma's waist in what had become their greeting ritual. The calf then turned her attention to the visitors, curious and friendly, reaching out her trunk to investigate these new humans. Emma watched Eleanor Pritchard's stern expression soften as Hope's trunk gently explored her handbag. One of the council members, a grandfather of 5, knelt down and let Hope touch his face, his eyes growing misty. They left 20 minutes later, promising to work on a temporary special permit that would allow Emma to continue caring for Hope while longer-term arrangements were made. Eleanor Pritchard paused at the door and told Emma, in a quieter voice than before, that what she was doing was remarkable. Difficult and probably thankless, but remarkable. As the days stretched into weeks, Emma's life was completely reorganized around Hope's needs. She took a leave of absence from her job at the clinic, using her savings and a GoFundMe campaign set up by supporters to cover expenses. Her house was perpetually messy, her clothes were perpetually dirty, and she was perpetually exhausted. But she was also happier than she'd been in years. Hope was thriving. By week 3, she'd gained over 50 pounds. Her skin had filled out, her eyes sparkled with intelligence and mischief, and she was eating solid foods in addition to her milk formula. She'd figured out how to open the garden shed door, how to turn on the outdoor faucet with her trunk, and how to steal vegetables from Emma's garden basket. Dr. Patel brought other staff members from the Conservancy to observe Hope's development. They were amazed by her progress and by the clear bond between calf and caregiver. But they were also beginning to voice concerns about the future. Hope was growing rapidly. She would eventually weigh several tons and need dozens of acres to roam. Emma's 2-acre yard, which had seemed spacious, was already feeling small. And beyond the practical considerations, then there was a more fundamental question. Was it right to keep Hope in a domestic environment when she was a wild animal that needed to learn the complex social and survival skills of her species? The question haunted Emma late at night as she lay on her porch bed with Hope sleeping nearby. She knew the answer intellectually. Hope needed to be with other elephants, needed to learn to be an elephant, needed to eventually return to a wild or semi-wild setting. But her heart rebelled against the thought of separation. The decision was forced by an unexpected event in week 6. Emma was working in her front yard, trimming hedges while Hope explored nearby under her watchful eye. The calf had been trained to stay within the property boundaries and generally obeyed, though her curiosity sometimes got the better of her. And a delivery truck pulled up to the neighbor's house across the street. The driver got out, opened the back, and began unloading boxes. He didn't notice the large dog, an aggressive German shepherd that had escaped its yard, charging toward him until it was too late. The dog attacked with vicious intent, latching onto the driver's leg and pulling him to the ground. The man's screams brought Emma running, but before she could reach him, Hope reacted. The calf, responding to the sounds of distress, charged across the street with surprising speed. She positioned herself between the dog and the fallen man, trumpeting loudly and stamping her feet. The dog released its grip and lunged at Hope, but the elephant calf was ready. She swung her trunk like a club, connecting with the dog and sending it sprawling. The dog recovered and circled, looking for an opening, but Hope stood her ground, making herself appear larger, ears spread, continuing her loud warning calls. The dog's owner finally appeared and called the animal off. Emma reached the injured driver and immediately began first aid while someone called an ambulance. Hope remained close, her trunk gently touching Emma's back as if to check that her mother figure was safe. The incident was captured on a neighbor's security camera and went viral within hours. News coverage focused on the heroic elephant calf, the miraculous rescue, and the obvious intelligence and emotional connection Hope displayed. But it also highlighted the risks of keeping a growing elephant in a residential area. That evening, Dr. Patel arrived with a formal proposal from the Riverside Wildlife Conservancy Board. They wanted to offer Emma an official position as Hope's primary caregiver, but it would require relocating to the Conservancy's facilities. Emma would live in staff housing on the property, work with Hope daily, but also begin the process of integrating the calf with other elephants and preparing her for eventual release or placement in a sanctuary setting. It was the solution Emma knew was necessary, but dreaded. It meant leaving her home, but it meant staying with Hope. It meant beginning the process of letting go, but not yet, not completely. Emma looked at Hope, who was contentedly stripping leaves from a tree branch, oblivious to the weighty decisions being made about her future. The calf had saved a stranger's life today, acting on instinct and empathy. She had shown the world what Emma already knew, that Hope was extraordinary, and that their bond was real, and that whatever came next, it would be worthwhile. Emma accepted the position. 3 days later, with half the town lining the streets to watch, Emma and Hope made the 3-mile journey to the Riverside Wildlife Conservancy. Hope rode in a specially modified livestock trailer, with Emma sitting beside her the entire way, holding her trunk, singing softly to keep her calm. As they passed through the Conservancy gates, Emma felt a strange mixture of grief and relief. This chapter of their story was ending, but a new one was beginning. Hope would have space to run, other elephants to learn from, and the best possible chance at eventually returning to her natural habitat. But first, they had more time together. Time to teach Hope what she needed to know. Time to strengthen her for the challenges ahead. In time to prepare for the inevitable moment when Emma would have to do the hardest thing she'd ever done, let Hope go. The Conservancy became Emma's world for the next 18 months. She moved into a small cottage on the property, its windows overlooking the elephant enclosure where Hope spent her days. The adjustment was difficult initially, for both of them. Hope struggled with the new environment, calling for Emma constantly, refusing to eat if Emma wasn't nearby. But gradually, under the patient guidance of Dr. Patel and the Conservancy's elephant specialists, Hope began to expand her world. She met the other orphaned calves, including 2 females named Luna and Kaya, who were slightly older. The first interactions were tentative, trunk touches, parallel play, cautious investigations. But elephants are inherently social, and Hope's isolation with Emma had left her hungry for connection with her own kind. Emma watched from the observation platform as Hope took her first mud bath with Luna, both calves spraying each other and trumpeting with joy. She watched Hope learn to strip bark from trees by imitating Kaya's technique. She watched Hope discover that other elephants could be sources of comfort too, that she could rest her head against Luna's flank when tired, that she could play fight with the younger calf Misha without anyone getting hurt. Each milestone was a tiny grief for Emma, proof that Hope was becoming less dependent on her, more integrated into elephant society. But each milestone was also a celebration, proof that Hope would survive and thrive in the world she was meant for. Emma's role evolved. She was no longer Hope's primary caregiver, but one of her teachers. She worked with the training team, using positive reinforcement to teach Hope behaviors that would be essential for her eventual wild release, responding to auditory cues, accepting veterinary procedures without fear, recognizing potential dangers. Hope excelled at everything. She was intelligent, adaptable, and eager to please. By her first birthday, she'd tripled her weight and stood nearly 6 feet tall at the shoulder. She was becoming a proper elephant, graceful, strong, and increasingly independent. But the bond with Emma remained. Hope would always respond to Emma's voice above others. When Emma entered the enclosure for training sessions, Hope would abandon whatever she was doing to greet her, trunk wrapped around Emma's waist, forehead pressed against Emma's chest, rumbling sounds that Emma had learned to recognize as contentment. The Conservancy became a destination for wildlife supporters and journalists documenting Hope's development. Emma gave interviews, participated in fundraising events, and gradually became a spokeswoman for elephant conservation. She learned about the threats facing elephants in the wild: poaching, habitat loss, human-wildlife conflict. She learned about the complex work of sanctuaries and conservancies trying to protect these magnificent animals. The work gave her life new purpose, but it also made the next phase more painful because she understood it more deeply. When Hope was 18 months old, Dr. Patel gathered Emma and the senior staff for a meeting. The Riverside Wildlife Conservancy had partnered with a large protected sanctuary in a neighboring state, 50,000 acres of forest and grassland, where a herd of rescued elephants lived in semi-wild conditions. It was as close to a natural environment as Hope could experience while still receiving human protection. The sanctuary was ready to receive Hope. They had a group of young elephants around her age that would form a cohesive herd. The environment was ideal: diverse food sources, natural water features, room to roam and explore. It was everything Emma had known was coming, but had tried not to think about. The timeline was set. Hope would transfer to the sanctuary in 3 months, giving Emma time to prepare her, and to prepare herself. Those 3 months felt simultaneously endless and far too short. So Emma spent every possible moment with Hope, documenting everything, taking photos, recording videos, memorizing the exact feel of Hope's trunk wrapping around her arm, the specific sound of her greeting rumble, the way she'd rest her head on Emma's shoulder when she was tired. Emma also prepared Hope for the transition. With the guidance of elephant behavior specialists, she gradually reduced her presence in Hope's daily routine. She introduced Hope to the handlers, who would be transporting her and staying with her during the initial sanctuary integration. She taught Hope special signals, a particular whistle that would always mean Emma was near, a specific touch pattern that meant safety and comfort. Hope sensed the change. She became clingier during Emma's visits, following closer, touching more frequently. Sometimes Emma would wake at night and find Hope standing at the fence line nearest to Emma's cottage, just watching, as if making sure Emma was still there. The day of transfer arrived far too quickly. It was early autumn, the air crisp and clear, the leaves just beginning to turn. A specialized elephant transport vehicle arrived at dawn, essentially a large trailer with padded walls, air conditioning, and windows so Hope could see out during the 8-hour journey. Emma had barely slept. She'd spent the night on a cot in the barn adjacent to Hope's enclosure, listening to the sounds of the young elephants sleeping, their breathing, their occasional movements, their soft vocalizations. Hope had pressed against the fence, her trunk reaching toward Emma through the bars, maintaining contact through the long hours. The loading process was careful and gradual. The transport team had spent the previous week training Hope to walk into the trailer voluntarily, using her favorite treats and positive reinforcement. But this morning, Hope balked. She approached the ramp, then backed away, trumpeting her distress. Emma felt her heart breaking. She stepped forward and placed her hand on Hope's shoulder, looking into those intelligent, frightened eyes. She used their special signal, a specific pattern of touches on Hope's trunk, and began walking slowly toward the trailer. Hope followed, trust overriding fear. Inside the trailer, Emma sat with Hope on specially designed benches, with Hope's head resting in Emma's lap. The sanctuary's headkeeper, a woman named Sandra with 20 years of elephant experience, sat nearby, speaking quietly to Hope. "Are beginning the process of transferring the bond of trust." The drive took nearly 9 hours with stops. At each rest break, Emma walked with Hope around the secured areas, offering water and reassurance. She watched Sandra gradually take over more of the caretaking tasks, knowing this was necessary, hating every second of it. When they arrived at the sanctuary, the late afternoon sun cast golden light across an expanse of land so vast Emma couldn't see its boundaries. In the distance, a herd of elephants moved through the grassland, 8 young elephants between the ages of 1 and 3 years, all orphans or rescues, all learning to be wild again. Hope's trunk lifted, scenting the air. Her ears spread forward. For the first time that day, her body language shifted from anxiety to curiosity. She made a low rumbling sound, different from any Emma had heard before. It sounded like wonder. The release protocol was gradual. Hope was initially placed in a transition enclosure, a large paddock adjacent to the main sanctuary grounds, where she could see, smell, and hear the other elephants without being overwhelmed by direct contact. Emma stayed at the sanctuary for 5 days, visiting Hope 3 times daily, but decreasing the visit duration each time. She watched Hope interact with the other elephants through the fence line, trunk touches, vocalizations, play behaviors. She watched a slightly older female named Betwee take particular interest in Hope, positioning herself as a protective older sister figure. She watched Hope's attention gradually shift from Emma to her new companions. On the 5th day, the sanctuary team opened the gates and allowed Hope to join the herd on her own terms. Emma watched from a covered observation post, binoculars pressed to her eyes, tears streaming down her face. Hope approached the herd slowly. The other young elephants came forward to meet her, surrounding her with gentle trunk touches, welcoming her into their group. Betwee positioned herself next to Hope, and the 2 young elephants began to walk together toward a distant waterhole, with the rest of the herd following. Hope turned back once, her trunk raised high, as if catching Emma's scent on the wind. Then she faced forward and kept walking, joining her new family, moving toward the life she was meant to live. Emma collapsed onto the bench, her body shaking with sobs, grief and relief and love all mixed together. That night, Emma returned to the conservancy, alone. Her cottage felt impossibly empty. She sat on her small porch in the darkness, remembering the early days when Hope would sleep just outside her door, when every moment was consumed with feeding schedules and bonding rituals. She looked at her phone, at the thousands of messages from supporters around the world who had followed Hope's journey. She opened her laptop and began to write. Not a social media post, but a letter to Hope that she'd never send, putting into words everything she needed to say. She wrote about the morning Hope stumbled into her backyard, about the privilege of being trusted by such a magnificent creature, about watching Hope grow from a fragile orphan into a healthy, confident young elephant. She wrote about the pain of letting go and the pride of knowing she'd done right by Hope, even when it was the hardest thing imaginable. 3 months passed. Emma threw herself into her work at the conservancy, caring for new arrivals, giving talks about elephant conservation, raising funds for sanctuary partnerships. The days were busy enough that she could function. The nights were harder. She dreamed about Hope constantly, dreams where Hope called for her, where Hope needed her, where Emma couldn't reach her. Dr. Patel and the sanctuary director Sandra arranged for Emma to visit Hope in late winter, 6 months after the transfer. Emma was both desperate to go and terrified of what she'd find. Would Hope remember her? Would Hope care? The drive back to the sanctuary felt longer than before. Emma's stomach was in knots. Sandra met her at the visitor center with a warm hug and an enigmatic smile. They drove to the observation area where the herd was expected to pass during their late afternoon movement toward water. Emma stood at the fence line, scanning the distant grassland, searching for a familiar shape among the group of elephants that appeared on the horizon. The herd approached slowly, stopping to feed, playing as they came. Emma pulled out the special whistle, the one she'd trained Hope to recognize above all others. She blew 3 short bursts. For several seconds, nothing happened. Emma's heart sank. Too much time had passed. Hope had moved on. That was good. That was healthy. That was what was supposed to happen. Then Hope's head snapped up. Her ears spread wide. Then, suddenly, she was running a full-speed charge across 200 yards of open grassland, trumpeting loudly, leaving the confused herd behind. Emma started laughing and crying simultaneously as Hope reached the fence line. The young elephant was enormous now, easily 7 feet tall, powerful and graceful. But the way she reached for Emma was exactly the same. Trunk wrapping around her waist, forehead pressing against Emma's chest. That specific rumble of greeting that meant home, that meant mother, that meant love. Emma held Hope's trunk with both hands, pressing her face against it, breathing in the familiar scent. Grass and dust and something indefinably Hope. They stood like that for long minutes, reconnecting, remembering, being together again. The other elephants gradually approached, curious about this human who had caused such a reaction in their herd mate. Betwee came first, protective and watchful, positioning herself next to Hope. Emma greeted her too, acknowledging Betwee's role as Hope's guardian and friend. For 2 hours, Emma sat at the fence line while Hope stood close, occasionally wandering a few steps to graze or interact with her herd, but always returning to Emma, checking in, maintaining contact. It was perfect. Hope was fully integrated with her elephant family, but hadn't forgotten her first family. As the sun began to set and Sandra gently indicated it was time to leave, Emma stood and placed both hands on Hope's face, making eye contact the way they used to. She used their special signal one more time, the pattern of touches that meant, "I love you, you're safe, I'm proud of you." Hope responded with her own signal, a gentle touch to Emma's shoulder, the exact spot where she used to rest her head as a tiny calf. Then Hope turned and walked back to her herd, and they moved together into the golden evening light, a group of young elephants finding their way in the world, learning to be wild. Emma watched until they disappeared into the distance. During the drive back to the conservancy, Sandra told Emma that the sanctuary would welcome her to visit as often as she wanted. Hope would likely always recognize and respond to her. Their bond was part of Hope's story, part of who she'd become. Not a barrier to her elephant identity, but a foundation that had given her the security and trust needed to flourish. In the following months, Emma visited regularly. She watched Hope continue to grow and thrive. She was there when Hope experienced her first successful foraging session, finding and extracting roots entirely on her own. She was there when the herd moved to the higher elevations for summer grazing. She was there when Hope showed her first signs of entering adolescence, becoming more independent but also more integrated into the herd's social structure. Emma's role in Hope's life had transformed from mother to godparent, from essential to supplementary. It was exactly as it should be. 2 years after their first meeting in Emma's backyard, Emma stood at the sanctuary giving a presentation to a group of donors and conservation students. She told Hope's story, the miraculous rescue, the intensive bonding, the necessary separation, and the ongoing connection. She ended with words she'd learned through the hardest experience of her life, that love sometimes means letting go, that the best thing you can give someone is the freedom to become who they're meant to be, and that true bonds don't break. They just evolve. As she spoke, the herd of young elephants moved past the conference building. Hope was at the front, confident and strong, leading her family toward evening water. She paused and looked toward the building where Emma stood, her trunk raised high. Then she rumbled once, a sound that carried clearly through the open windows, and continued on her way. Emma smiled through tears and whispered what had become her mantra, her comfort, her truth. Letting go doesn't mean goodbye. It means I love you enough to want you to be free. In that moment, both Emma and Hope were exactly where they belonged, connected by an unbreakable bond, separated by the distance necessary for growth, and united in the knowledge that some relationships transcend time and space and species, lasting forever in the way that really matters.